Here we go. So there are 4 market structures. Perfect competition is one of them. And 4 market structures for various industries can be described as if they're located on a scale where the market power of the seller can be very, very strong or very, very weak. So on the weakest side of that scale is pure competition or perfect competition. Those 2 terms are the same. There's nothing perfect or pure in the world. So this is a very theoretical kind of imaginary structure. But there are many, many companies that are similar, very close to perfect competition. That's why we're looking at kind of at the one extreme of how do companies compete in the following condition. When we have very large number of buyers and sellers in the market. So a large meaning thousands. So even hundreds could be okay. And in fact, there are in some cases when with 2 or 3 buyers or sellers, you can already have firms compete pretty severely with each other. So these companies also sell identical products. So that's another exaggeration. So all these things, the assumptions that we're making are in fact exaggerations. But if we understand how the market works in these conditions, then we could predict its behavior in slightly different conditions. So in this environment where we have a large number of buyers and sellers and selling identical products, it so happens that neither buyers nor sellers can set the price of the product. So the market will set the price. So the interaction, the big giant interaction of buyers and sellers in the market will come up with a price. And once it did, everyone will have to take the price as given. So another assumption we make is that there's free entry and free exit of firms in and out of business. So if you own a coffee shop, you could tomorrow shut down your coffee shop, or you could buy a new coffee shop tomorrow. So again, you see this as an exaggeration because nothing is really free. Everything has an opportunity cost, as we know. But there are markets where the entry and exit is relatively inexpensive, such as selling on the side of the street or selling online. This could be a relatively inexpensive undertaking. Entry and exit is pretty close to being free. So you can start a business these days with $100. If you Google $100 startups, there are many, many ideas out there. So another exaggeration or assumption that we make is that buyers and sellers have perfect information about each other's prices. So without perfect information, then you can exploit different loopholes of people not knowing what the prices are. But here we assume everybody knows each other's price. So markets that are nearly perfectly competitive are all markets for agricultural goods. So tomatoes, potatoes, milk, sour cream, maybe less so, but things that you grow, apples, pears, oranges. So you never really see the name of the farmer when you're buying potatoes, right? The name of the farmer is not on the potatoes. There's some kind of brand usually involved. Oftentimes it's a store brand, right? But they have nothing to do with being the producer of that product. Other things like fish, right? Things like stocks, bitcoins, right? Markets, all those are markets. It doesn't really matter who you're buying from. You're buying the same product. Raw materials like gold and silver and tin and copper. anything monetary like foreign exchange too. Doesn't matter who you're buying it from. There are many, many buyers, many sellers. And we could think about a coffee shop around the corner or a coffee stand in New York City, like all those food trucks. Very, very competitive business. So as long as there are many, many substitutes for whatever you're selling, and there are many, many other buyers who would be buying, that is a competitive market. So nobody can come to the store and say, okay, well, I don't want this potatoes at $3 a pound. I want them for 50 cents a pound, and you won't be able to change the market price, right? As you know. So, and neither can an individual seller. They can't come to the wholesale place and say, well, I'm not going to sell you potatoes for $2 a pound. I need at least $3. And the market is not going to change the price for him. So everybody's a price taker. So in this market, this is one example right here, is a dairy farms. So specifically from a Pennsylvania newspaper, Lancaster County paper, where the farmer is mentioning that the markets for milk is now tough. We don't have a whole lot of control. We are a price taker, not a price maker. So a lot of competition in the market, including what they call fake milk. So competing with the real milk. I call that almond milk. And yes, of course, if you're a dairy farmer, you would have contempt for all that. So, facts about a competitive business now. How exactly does a competitive firm, like a farm or little coffee shop, takes its price from the market? Okay. So on the right here, we have our traditional supply and demand curve for the industry. So industry is a bunch of firms producing the same product. That's an industry. So there's airline industry, there's dairy industry, right? There's potato industry. So those are different industries. Let's imagine this is a milk producing industry. And so the price of a truckload of milk is $131. That's the market price. It's set by the conditions of the supply and demand in the market. So by the intersection of supply and demand in the market. If demand changes, increases, say people will drink more milk, like we know that the demand curve will shift to the right and we'll have a higher price, maybe 150 or something. But currently it's 131. And so now every individual firm will have to take 131 as given and produce whatever they want, any quantity. Quantity can be, one truckload, or it could be 100 truckloads, as in this example. And they could produce it, but they would have to sell it at whatever the market price is. Okay, so that's the plight of being in a competitive market. So perfectly elastic demand curve. That's what perfectly elastic demand curve looks like. It's flat, it's horizontal for each individual firm, not for the industry. The industry itself still abides by the laws of supply and demand. Okay, so demand curve is really the same as the price, it so happens. And it's the same as the marginal revenue, which is another way to say is extra revenue for selling an extra unit of product. In this case, extra revenue is $131 for each one truckload of milk. So let's take it a little further and compute the actual profits of this producer. And the point we're making is that competitive firm chooses quantity but not price, because they're price takers, to maximize profits. All right. What do we know? What do we need to know in order to maximize our profits? We have our total revenue. Depending on the quantity of units sold, our unit is a truckload, but it could be anything. So if you sell one, you receive $131, right? If you sell two, that doubles, three, that triples, and so on. If you sell 10, that is multiplied by 10. What else do we need to know about the firm? Okay, well, this firm happens to have a fixed cost. So fixed cost of production is $100 before you even start producing. So when the number of units is zero, it still costs you $100 in terms of supplies, right? Or fertilizer and all that. Oh, well, we're talking about cow maintenance, right? There has to be some fixed cost of production. And then the variable costs, cost of deliveries of the milk, of milking the cows, and maybe feeding more cows. Also, electricity and feed and all that. So adds up. So these are the things that we know. Everything else we can compute by hand. Really. So we know it's given to us by the business conditions. So it's usually the total costs are given to us, or total or variable and fixed, and you can just add them up together to get the total cost. And that's given to us in the problem. So that's kind of specific to each business. So we have to learn that in the problem. And then we can always compute the total revenue, just multiply the price by the quantity. And then the difference. So like first, let's compute the total costs. So add up these two columns. And now you could compute the profit, right? The total cost, you need to be subtracted from total revenue in order to get the profit. So there's two numbers you need, and you receive profit. So, and now just visually you can say, okay, we're maximizing our profits when the quantity produced is 9. So we have not chosen the price that was given to us. We've taken it from the market, but we've chosen the quantity, and that's 9, right? Because that's the largest amount of profit we can get. Now we're going to put it on a graph just because we can. It's not one of those graphs that you will often see in this chapter, but it's still a good idea to visually see what we're doing. Total revenue increases by 131 with every unit, right? So when we have 10 units or so, it's kind of corresponds to 1,310 or so right here. So that point would be, right? So that's total revenue that's going up like a 45, a similar degree line. And the total cost, if we were to plot all those numbers that were in the column for total cost, we'll get something like this. So the cost, the curve that crosses total revenue, but it also is a little squiggly. So, and the largest difference between these two curves, the vertical difference, it happens to be at 9 units. So that's our quantity scale on 9 units. Break-even point is when total revenue equals total cost. We just break even, but really we're not looking for break-even points most of the time. We want to maximize our profit as a business, right? Yep. So there's another way, a shorter way, a more convenient way, and a more common way to find the profit maximizing Q star. Q star is what we're after here. We want to find in any profit maximization problem for perfect competition, the only thing we're looking for is the quantity which quantity should the firm produce in order to maximize profits? Because the firm is not making a decision about the price, it's only making a decision about quantity. So, and there's only one rule that we can use for that is to set marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So quantity is such that the magic rule of marginal revenue equals marginal cost holds. So basically, logically, if you're selling a unit of whatever your output is, if it brings you more than it costs you to produce, you should be producing an extra unit. So the rule basically says that as long as the revenue for selling an extra unit is higher than the cost, keep producing. Well, let's see how that works with numbers. So we have the marginal revenue is always 131. Let's find the marginal cost. For that, we need the total cost, or change in total cost, divided by the change in quantity. So change in quantity is always 1. So it's basically ends up being the change in total cost. Change. Let's put it on this graph right now. You see, we changed from 0 to 1, and we got a 90 as a marginal cost. Then we increased production from 1 to 2, and that added $80 to the cost, right? And then the production kept increasing, and the marginal cost first kept decreasing in a classical way, in a check mark shape, or like a Nike commercial shape. Is it Nike symbol? Yeah. Check mark kind of shape. Or you could say it's a U shape too. So goes down and then it goes up pretty sharply, right, at the end. So what that tells us is, well, suppose we're making 1 unit. Should we be making the second unit? So the cost of it is less than the revenue. The answer is, why not? Right? So if it's bringing us $131, but it only adds $80 to the cost, we should definitely be making it. And move on to unit 3 and unit 4 and 5 and 6 and 7. All of them are cheaper to produce than they bring in terms of revenue. So unit 8, same is true. Even unit 9, look, it's cheaper to produce than it brings in terms of revenue. But unit 10, things change. Like, you're not going to be producing unit 10 here because it costs you more than it brings you in terms of revenue. So you stop at 9, and so it happens to be the profit maximizing quantity. And this rule works at all times. If we found the same 299 profit value, right? $299, applying, say, this golden rule: marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Okay, what do we do next? Of course, we must put it on the graph. So yes, a little note here is that marginal revenue may be slightly higher than the marginal cost, but you don't want it lower, right? If you go lower, you continue to produce more and more, you will be deviating from your profit maximizing quantity, right? So you're getting into the territory where the profit starts to decrease because your costs are accumulating. Okay, the graph. Hold your breath. We are gonna draw 3 lines again, our favorite lines. Marginal revenue equals price at 131. Then we have the check mark shaped marginal cost. And where it intersects, marginal cost intersects the marginal revenue. And what we want to see is that Q star, which is 9, right? So this intersection gives us the Q star. Here you go. That's the point. Total revenue is shown on the graph as our price times our quantity. So the rectangle here is the total revenue. You're already familiar with that. Then we have average total cost, so the per unit cost of production, that because of the fixed cost, they're rapidly decreasing. They're decreasing and decreasing and decreasing, but then at some point they start to increase slightly because the variable costs start to accumulate and start to increase faster than your output. So not proportional to your output, but faster. Average total cost in general has different shapes and many different problems, but this is a kind of a classic shape that it, because of the fixed cost, it goes down sharply, but then it can start increasing too. So what else can we see from this graph? Well, we can see that average total cost that corresponds to our output of 9 is about $97.78. So we could see that from the table. In the table, we had this number, or we could compute it from the table. We could take the total cost and divide it by 9, and this would be the per unit cost of production. So that's what it costs to produce that truckload of milk. And then we sell it at 131, right? So the difference is something we can pocket. It's our profit. Ta-da, right? So we can even draw profit on this graph. So this total cost, just the reminder, the total cost, we take the per unit cost average, multiplied by quantity, and we get the total cost. Okay, so this is the blue rectangle in this picture is the total cost of production, right? We have total revenue, which is the pink rectangle, the orange, right? My color blind today, so it looks like orange. And then subtract the blue rectangle, and the difference is our profit. Okay, so this is our profit, and we can call the part, the difference between P and ATC, per unit profit, per unit profit. So that's the difference, per unit profit. So yes, profit is a rectangle in which Q is on the one side and the per unit profit is on the other side. So one is the rise and one is the run over this rectangle. So, okay. Weird animation, I didn't check. I usually delete animation, I don't like it. Okay, well, let's look at it without animation. So what if things change? So we no longer get the price of 131. So things have gotten worse in this market, went downhill really. So the price declined from what used to be $281 only. And this may have happened for various reasons. Maybe the supply increased too much or demand decreased too much. So that price was formed in the industry, in the large industry market, and it's no longer the same. Things got tough. So what does it mean? How do we draw that? Well, the price line is no longer up here at 131, but now it's down here at 81. And now the average, so we find our Q star applying the same golden rule. Marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So we look for that intersection of these two curves. And we found that the Q is no longer 9, but it's 6. Okay, we tell ourselves. Let's see how much does it cost to produce 6 units. Well, it costs whatever the average total cost line tells us. It costs more to produce than we can sell it for, right? It costs 91 something and we sell it for 81. So we're making a loss now. So this rectangle is a loss. So if market price drops below the cost of production, the profit is no longer a profit, but it's a loss. The question becomes, should we stay in business or should we immediately shut down? Based on this picture, we cannot tell because we're missing one crucial piece of information. In order to make that decision whether to stay in business or to shut down, we actually need we need to know average variable costs. Okay, so average variable cost line usually lies under average total cost. If it's under, if we are above, if this price of 81 is above average variable cost, yes, then you stay in business and produce at a loss, at least for a while, hoping that things will return. During the pandemics, some businesses produced at a loss. They stayed open, they didn't shut down because they could at least pay a little bit of their fixed cost, and they could cover their day-to-day expenses in terms of variable costs. But if they can't cover their day-to-day expenses and they continue to make a loss, then in the long run, once their lease is up, they make a different decision. They make a decision perhaps to shut down because maybe there's no hope for them to make the money. And maybe the low price is there to stay. But if not, then the loss is temporary and it can be tolerated. So stay in business or shut down is a decision, and it depends on average variable costs. So we're going to illustrate it in this graph by adding average variable cost to the graph. Or even look at your picture. Look at your text. Okay, so is there a time limit where they can absorb the loss in order to stay in business? And whether it could be added to the graph? Good question. The time limit is your short run versus your long run. So in the short run, you've already made the decision. So fixed costs are mostly sunk costs, right? So sunk costs means they cannot be recovered. So you've already signed your lease, you've already bought your food license, so you have already incurred that cost. So now your decision is really like sunk cost, as you've read about sunk cost, it better be ignored for your day-to-day decisions, for your short-term decisions, ignore it. So that way you'll make an economically correct decisions. But in the long run, so you're ignoring it today, but you're not going to ignore it next time your lease is up, right? So next time you're making a long-term decision about your capital, like how large you should grow or how small you should be. Maybe you should shrink. Maybe you should have a smaller space and continue to operate. But that would change your cost decisions for the next period of time. So for how long should you stay in business? There is no rule, but as long as you can, as long as you have committed expenses in terms of the fixed costs and you're making your variable costs, making those those ends meet, you stay in business. But then, yes, make a long-run decision independently of that. Separate at a loss because the fixed cost is sunk, and hoping, of course, that the price will go back up. So you really need this price. So, okay, first of all, let's look at the green line and make sure that you are you are meeting your day-to-day needs. So the variable cost of production is lower. It's less than $81 per unit. You are paying maybe $70 per unit, 75 or so, right, according to this graph, right? If you're producing 6 units, then your variable cost to your employees, to your suppliers on a day-to-day basis is, let's say, $75. So when you are selling the unit at 81, which is not covering part of your fixed costs, but still better than not to work at all. Because if you shut down, you won't be able to cover any of the fixed cost at all. So this difference between average total cost and average variable cost completely will not be covered, right? So now at least you're covering some of it. So better to operate at a loss at this point. In practice, make your own calculations and see, does it make sense to operate at a loss? Many airlines operated at a loss. Our New Jersey Transit, where I live in New Jersey, has been running their regular schedule all the way through the pandemic, the entire time, even though nobody was riding trains, right? So clearly we're operating at a loss. Okay. One more. Oh, okay. So this slide is making the point that I forgot to make, is that, so how low can you go in terms of the price? Oh, and at which point should you be definitely shutting down? So if the price falls to $71, so according to this story, $71 is your minimum average variable cost. And so the price falls to that level. And at this point, you are no longer, so if it falls below it, you're no longer able to pay your suppliers and your workers. So at this point, you have to shut down. So you can't even cover your day-to-day expenses, much less the overheads that you have accumulated. So in terms of your rent and your licenses and stuff. So the firm shuts down when it cannot cover variable cost of production. So when the price is less than the green line, the average variable cost, and we always mean at the optimal level of production, that Q star, at Q star. So we always look at Q star, how we're doing in terms of revenue and in terms of the costs. Okay. Next point is, so what is what kind of price will minimize our costs? And so at which price, what minimal price would be the break-even price for us for this business? The break-even in the sense that we would cover all of our cost of production and we would stay in business, but we won't make any profit. So we won't make any economic profits. So keep that in mind, economic and profit as opposed to accounting profit. So we are paying, when we're making zero profit in economic terms, so we are paying all of our suppliers, we are paying all of our cost of production, we're paying ourselves as well. The opportunity cost of staying in that business. Okay, so if we gave up a job that pays $30,000 a year, so we better be making that here and covering that cost. So somewhere in the total cost of production depicted here, we have already incorporated that salary to ourselves, or that profit to ourselves that we should be paying. So the zero, when we say zero profit in economics, it doesn't mean dire situation when you walk out barefoot and naked and you have no money to like feed your kids, right? No, it's a comfortable state where you are paid just enough, but no more, but just enough to stay in business and keep your workers in business and keep your suppliers in business. So this is our normal profit. That's another name for zero profit or break-even point, um, or as minimum or normal profit in economic terms. So notice that when we're producing at um, in our zero profit conditions, our cost of production are minimized. So average total cost is at its minimum. The blue line on this graph is at its very, very minimum. Okay, so we're minimizing completely our cost of production. We cannot do any better than that. And we're producing the optimal amount and not above that. So somewhere at the price of just under $100, maybe $90 or so is our minimum cost of production. And at this point, we're actually in a good equilibrium. We want to be, as a competitive firm, as any normal firm, of course, we want to be making a profit. So we want the price to be $150, right, per unit, or 200, better yet, per unit. But this is the minimum that we can tolerate and still stay comfortably in business long term, right? So not in excruciating circumstances when we have to make a profit and barely stay in business hoping for the better. But here we are comfortable still staying in business and can survive long term. Okay, so the only problem that nothing lasts long term, and competitive market changes all the time, right? So people change their preferences, cost of production change, our cost of supplies change, right? So changing our cost curves. So, but this could be a long-run equilibrium if we had the power to keep it for a long time. Okay, this calculation shows that, or is it just an example? So if the price is 91, what will be the optimal quantity given the price? Okay, so the price is 91. We have the price equals marginal cost. We need to compute marginal cost. The price equals marginal cost is our golden rule. We need to compute the marginal cost of production and compare it to marginal revenue and decide that 7 is the optimal amount to produce. This answers the question, so find the Q. So it's an example of a typical problem. Okay, you have a line of data that relates to the cost, and you have the price. How do you find the optimal quantity? So here's how: wherever marginal revenue comes as close as possible to marginal cost and stays just a little bit higher, perhaps if possible, but doesn't go under marginal cost. Okay. Okay. So there is another point, interesting point that we can make is that as the price changed, and we have just looked at how our production decision behaved as the price was going down, right? We started out with the price 131, then we looked at 91, which was just at the slides prior to this, and the decision was to produce 7, right? And then when the price was 131, the decision was to produce 9. Then when the price was at 81, the decision was to produce 8. And then when we fell below the average variable cost, and the decision is to produce 0. Okay, so, and that's what we saw, below average variable cost, which is P1. Or I should have put numbers here, probably 71. So P1 is 71. Then P2 is what? Average variable cost. Oh, that one is 71. Below it is 0. No, P2 has marginal, yeah, so it's right at the variable cost. Then P3 is the one where we're producing at a loss, which is 81, all right? So we're producing at a loss below the cost of production. Then P4 was that comfortable level of output that was minimizing our average total cost, and we were producing a larger quantity at that point. And then when the price goes above our cost of production, we keep producing more and more, and we incur a profit. So for this firm, the supply curve looks like this upward sloping part of the marginal cost firm, of the marginal cost for the firm. But imagine our industry, our market contains 100 or maybe 1,000 of these kind of firms. Like if you were to sum up all the supply from each and one of these firms, then you would get the supply curve of the entire market. So that's where it comes from the decision of individual companies motivated by profits to produce more when the price is higher. And as a result, voila, we have the market supply curve, which is shown here as the red line. Red line for the industry, on the industry side, is on the supply curve in the market. Now, let's see what happens if all of a sudden consumers want more of the product, of whatever it is. It could be milk, it could be apples. Apples, I like apples. So how about apples? $50 a bushel is the current price, and every individual apple manufacturer of apples, yes, right? So producer of apples, right? So farmer is selling apples at $50. And what if now people want more apples? So healthy food, right? Good for you. So demand shifts to the right, and now the new price is 70. What kind of signal does it send through the market channels? Like nothing. There are no channels in the market. The only signals that our producers get is the price. People want more apples. Prices seem to go up. Farmers ring a bell. Should we be planting more apples? Now the price is 70, and given our cost of production, we're actually making a profit, because now we're looking at the new marginal revenue and marginal cost intersection, right? They want to produce more than 100. So they used to produce 100. Now maybe it's 120 or so. And the difference between the cost curve, right, the blue cost curve, and the marginal revenue, the price, right? So that makes it this green whole area, that makes it a profit. So it's a good thing for producers. The question is it going to last? And for how long is it going to last? That all of a sudden sudden people want more apples. Producers reacted in a good way. They produced more and they had a profit. Well, the answer is that it's an industry with zero entry costs. So that was one of our assumptions. So anybody can start their apple growing business tomorrow, or they can even start importing apples tomorrow. And this profit is going to be wiped out. So it's not going to last for a long time. But at least for some time, we might expect that more firms will enter the industry. And how are we going to see that? We're going to see that on the supply side. Right? So more firms are going to enter the industry motivated by the profits. So the supply should increase. Are we going to see that? Yes. Supply should increase. And back will fall back to the profits evaporate. Did you see that? Evaporate just like that. So the price used to be 50, then it went up to 70, and then more firms entered the market, and there are no more short-term profits anymore. So the market settles back at the level it used to be, where each typical firm, we're thinking of it as a typical firm, produces 100 units and sells it at $50, right? And makes zero profit. See that? Because the costs are minimized and the price of 50 happens to be at the very minimum cost. So there's no way it can go any lower than that. So increase in demands, prompt entry of new firms, which reduces profits, and entry stops at that point. So this mechanism is called a long-run adjustment in the competitive market. Long-run adjustment. Okay, so in the long run, how do we adjust to changing demand conditions? So this graph answers that question. So demand increased, that increased the price, prompting more firms to enter the industry and reduce the price. So yes, so the competitive businesses have short-term profits, but do not have long-term profits. So it's impossible, basically, based on economic theory, for a competitive firm to sustain long-term profits. They have no market power. Anybody else can set up shop next door and take those profits away from them. It's hard to be in a competitive industry. It's hard to survive. You have to always innovate so that to increase the demand for your product, so you can keep your profits for a little bit, and then of course there'll be somebody else producing something very similar. Okay, so another short-run adjustment mechanism to losses. So competitive firms may have losses in the long run, and that'll prompt exit of the firms. Okay, so why would we have losses? Maybe demand went down. Let's see why. Yes. Well, look at this graph. So demand went down for something. What could it be? Well, this could be some kind of meat, right? People are eating a little less meat, maybe beef, right? So demand for beef went down. And now the market price is 40 instead of 50. And this typical firm that was making zero profit before is now making a loss. How do we know? Well, we're looking at the marginal revenue intersection with the marginal cost. And so the production will decrease to maybe 90 units, but then look, the cost of production of 90 units is higher than the revenue per unit. So we have a loss. It cannot last. We know that. So some companies that Now, that's a whole interesting question too. Who will be the first to leave the market? So just think about that for a second. So what companies, what kind of businesses will be the first to fold when they are operating in the condition of a loss, or in a loss environment is needed at least temporarily? Well, I can tell you which ones. Those for which staying in business has the highest opportunity cost. So if you own like a coffee shop, a restaurant, and your opportunity cost is $30,000 because that's the job you gave up, and that's your next best alternative. Well, maybe somebody around the corner gave up a job of neurosurgeon who was earning $200,000, $400,000 a year, and he always dreamed of being a restaurant owner, and that he gave up his job, and now he can go back. So he was making enough money to cover that cost of opportunity cost for himself. Now he can't, so he's gonna be the one to close his shop first, and you will stay in business. So his business in a way is inefficient, less efficient than yours. So it costs him more to stay in business. For you, it costs less. So those whose cost of production are lower will stay in business longer. Okay, long-term adjustment. Some firms will go out of business, so the supply shifts left, and our price returns back to normal, to where it used to be, $50, where the remaining firms, those who remained in business, will be earning zero economic profits. Okay, so the exit of firms stops when the price normalizes, so back to zero profit price. So in the long run, as we just saw, if such a thing exists as the long run, we have zero economic profit. We have price equals the extra cost of production per unit, and price equals minimum cost of production too. So the cost of production, you are being charged basically whatever the minimum cost of production of the item is in the competitive market. So you are paying the minimum possible price. So for consumers, perfect competition is the best market structure they can think of in terms of their consumer surplus, because the price cannot get any lower. They're already paying the lowest possible price. And therefore, economists pointed out that resources are efficiently allocated by perfectly competitive markets. So in fact, there's no other market structure that allocates resources that efficiently. In what sense efficiently? In terms of the cost of production, called productive efficiency. So the costs are minimized. The price equals minimum average total cost. And there is also a notion of allocative efficiency. The price equals marginal cost. So the combination of such a combination of goods and services produced where the price people are willing to pay equals just the cost of producing the products by the sellers. And it is possible for allocation to be inefficient, so the quantity produced. So it doesn't apply to perfect competition, but it will apply to other situations. It is possible for the quantity produced to be too low or too high under certain circumstances, which we'll discuss at some other point. That there will be cases when the price is higher than the cost of production or lower than the cost, and we have too much or too little produced. Okay, so as a summary, we have perfectly elastic demand for each individual firms. We have the golden rule, which is marginal revenue equals marginal cost. And please keep it in mind, we'll apply the golden rule for all market structures, really. And we're looking for Q star, so for how much to produce. We stop producing when we cannot cover the average variable cost of production. And in the long run, firms that are making a loss will go out of business. Firms that are attracted by profits will enter the industry, and the profits, economic profits, will be zero. Okay, now we have several questions. And there are going to be about 6 or 7 different questions, and I do need your participation here. So, which of the following markets is likely to be the most competitive? And we have options: cable television, automobiles and tires, oil refining, or farm commodities. So what is your answer?
B.
I would say farm.
Yes, farm commodities. Yes. So you're saying B, automobiles and trucks. Okay, so somebody is suggesting B. Automobiles and trucks are different from farm commodities in the sense that they're not hundreds of producers. They're actually only a handful, maybe if you use both hands, right? So of producers. Well, there are varieties within them, but so you're saying, Jenna, saying that I thought farms have subsidies and so they're not competitive. Competitive farms can have subsidies. The main giveaway for competition is that many different farmers are producing identical products. Okay, so, and that's not the case for automobiles and trucks. There are not super many producers, and they're not identical. Okay, well, maybe I should have been clear and contrasted this identical product feature of perfect competition with imperfect competition, something we'll look at next time. So imperfect competition involves producing differentiated products. So even things like pizza is not quite identical across pizza places, even though we keep assuming that it's the same pizza, but it's slightly different. So you have a preference to one with a basil. Somebody else likes the one with a lot of mozzarella. Somebody likes pepperonis on it, right? So, and same applies to trucks. Same applies to your clothing, right? So you can have the same white t-shirt, but it will be produced by slightly different manufacturers with different labels. Let me exit this file. Let's see if I can. Yes, and now keep it on the screen still. You could see, right? You could still see the problems, so we could scroll down through them more comfortably. Okay, I hope you could see, even though I haven't heard from anyone. So, okay, farm commodities is the best answer. Can you see problem number 2, practice 2?
I'm afraid not.
Oh. Okay, no, fine. I have done something that I didn't know was not gonna work. So I'm now gonna return. Can you see it now?
I
No.
can see you.
Oh. We are supposed to see. Okay, back to the problem. Can you see it?
Yes. That's
Oh,
better.
okay, better. Okay, can you see practice 2?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So what is, okay, so a problem that shows you a graph and then is asking you to find the break-even price, how many units should the firm produce. Let's start with the second part, and then we'll, like as our last question, we'll answer the break-even price. So kind of like the zero profit price, basically. Actually, we could start with number 1, and then we'll say how many units should the firm produce, is the firm making a profit or loss, and what will happen in the industry in the long run, given what we see on this picture. For the break-even price, always look for what? Maybe
Average total cost.
average total cost. Yes. Where is it minimized? So what is the absolutely minimum per unit cost that the company can sell at and still survive? So that's the break-even price. So not make any profit.
See Charlie, which is
Yeah,
14.
14, you're suggesting 14, Brian, saying yes. That's 14, right? So somewhere here at 14. So how many units should the farm produce?
4.
And how did you know, Rudy?
It's a 4 bushels. When you draw the vertical line from point C to the down number, it is a 4 quantity of tomatoes or bushels.
Okay, okay. And why did you choose point C? Because somebody is saying 5. Maybe 5 is a better. How did you choose that point?
Well, if we're looking at the break-even point, that's the number that they have to produce. But if they're looking for a maximum profits,
Yeah,
then that will
yes,
be
maximum profit. Usually it's assumed like, so how many units should the firm produce? Meaning in order to be sensible and maximize its own profits and not do anything else.
and there would be 5 because that's
Yeah.
the M, which is a marginal revenue equal or intersect with the
Yeah.
marginal cost.
I think Brian and Jenna, I agree with you. According to my magic machine right here. So yes, so this red dot is something that's at the intersection of marginal revenue and marginal cost, and so you just drop down to find the quantity, and it happens to be 5. They should produce 5. Now, is the firm making profit or loss? And we're assuming that they're smart enough to produce 5.
Making profits because
Oh,
of the average total cost is lower than the market price.
yeah. So Manik agrees, and others agree. So making a profit because the average total cost is under it. You can even compute how much, right? So we can system making a profit or loss. We would need to put together a rectangle here, right? We'd need to know it's approximately like 5.
3.7 times 5.
What times 5?
About 3.7 times 5, maybe.
Yeah. So it's about 4, right? So Monica's saying it's about 4 times 5. So it's a bit less, right? So this point is a little less than point C in terms of a little higher than point C in terms of cost. So it's a little higher than 14, right? So it's close to 4. So close to 20, right? That's total profit. I hope you agree, okay? So the question is, what will happen in this industry in the long run? It's asking you basically, are these profits gonna stay? Are they gonna remain?
Probably not. It will reach the zero economics profits.
Right. That's the story of competition. Zero economic profits in the long run. Entries will come in. Yes. So that's what Brian is saying. There will be profit attracts, right? It attracts in an industry where it costs zero to set up your own shop next door. You see somebody making a profit. And Monique is saying that if they continue to produce more items, they will operate at a loss. Okay, Monique is asking a question, like if they are continuing to produce more items, like 6 items or 7 items, will they operate at a loss?
Probably not, but that's not maximizing a profit.
Well, I see at some point average total cost will be higher than the price, right? So it would be like actually higher, they would be paying higher the price to produce an item than they're selling an item. Yeah. So yeah, at some point they would be operating a loss, but why would you do something like this, right? So there were there were surveys, like economists were interested naturally, right? Do these kind of models work, right? It seems like you don't see analysts at companies computing this kind of graphs, right? Sitting with this, a marginal revenue and marginal cost kind of graphs. But companies do seem to have a good idea of what extra costs it costs them to produce a unit, and they do take that into account into their pricing decisions. And it's so, in a way, they do behave as if they're maximizing their profit. And why wouldn't they? Because they're maximizing their profit. The competitive, capitalist business. Normally, right? So yes, models are very theoretical, but do companies behave as if consistent with that? So in the long run, we'll have entry of new firms and zero profits. Let's continue with this example. Okay, and this slide shows that you are right and you've done all your calculations correctly. So the profit rectangle is right here. I think Rudy was even close to identify per unit profit at being $30.70 or 60 cents. Yep. And the total profit is close to $20, so 18 in this case. Okay. One more situation. Same a business that produces tomatoes, but the price now fell to $10. So how many should they produce now? Brian says 3. And I bet Brian took the marginal revenue curve, which is supposed to be, the label is way too high, so it needs to be right here. So the blue curve and its intersection with the marginal cost curve, right? And that's how you find the 3. And then you could tell whether it making a profit or a loss. At 3, you're looking at the average total cost. Rudy, what do you see?
Yeah, I was thinking I would probably not gonna choose either 3 or 4 because at this point doesn't make sense. Well, unless I can see another graph called an average variable cost, then probably can just justifiable whether I'm gonna produce 3 or 4.
Well, okay, so let's use the golden rule. It always brings it to the optimal amount. So if we produce too much, we end up sometimes, yeah. So it's important to see the variable cost to decide whether we should produce at all or not. Okay, that's fine. But given this information, 3 is the right answer. Let's continue. Okay, that's what I guess you had in mind when for people who identified 3 as a solution. You had that like loss rectangle in mind, yeah. But we do for a better decision, we do want to know where the variable cost is. Okay, now another problem. If a firm is earning positive economic profit, that must be the case that
It has to be greater.
the price is greater than average cost. Yeah, right. So well, it says that price is higher than per unit cost of real production. Yeah, you agree, D. Yeah. Jenna and all and company. Yes, indeed. So what do we have here? Another. See, all the problems are so similar, and you're really good at it already. So you will ace this whole couple of chapters because they will all be like the last next. So Monopoly will have very similar idea too, and monopolistic competition will be not that different either. So this problem is just by not even reading the problem, just seeing 5, like it's already on the picture. Just reading the last question, the question itself, at what quantity will Ralph produce? So you don't need to know any details about what exactly he's doing. And Brian is saying 14. Who disagrees? Who has other ideas?
I do not agree with that. Seems like that graphic intersections between marginal cost and the price is in between 14 and 16. So I would produce more.
If you ought to produce 16, well, we don't know if 15 is possible, right? So we don't. Maybe these production comes in batches of 2. So is 16 better? So Karen is saying 15 is a possibility, maybe. Like if you extend 16, you kind of end up at a case where marginal cost is higher than the revenue. And that's where you don't want to be. That's why your profit starts to fall at that point. So
Okay.
So like right after the intersection, your profit starts to fall. So it starts to shrink. So that's where it's maximized. So 15 doesn't happen to be your answer choice in this problem. So I might be with Karen, but I have to side with Brian. So if 14 is the closest one to the right answer here. Okay, the same problem, but it's asking you how much money Ralph is gonna make. What is his profit?
It's $1 times the quantity, which is 14.
Yeah, see, this is great. Like you can already tell right away that he's producing 14, right? So his cost of production is around 4 at that point. So he's making $1 per unit and making 14 units. So 14 again, it would be the right answer. Great. So we have only 1 or 2 problems left. So if the market price is 5 again. About how much will this farm produce? It is a tricky question for you. Let's see, figure that out. Just look at the graph and see.
I would not produce anything in here.
Why?
Because it's going to cost you more to produce something.
Yeah.
Looking at the graph of average cost, average variable cost, and the average total cost, they're all above, way above than $5.
Gang here is saying the same thing, that it's 0. I was just testing how firm your convictions are. Yes, correct. It's 0. You would not produce here. Anything below, what, 7.5 or so? No, below 10, right? So below 10, or even really below 15 would be at a loss, right? Or 0. So anything below 10, you would not produce. You would be shutting down. So your shutdown price is about 10 here, right? So if you have to extend it to see that, that's your minimum average cost, is at about 10. And then in order to really stay in business long term, the price has to be above 15, right? So at 15, you would be minimizing the cost of production per unit. That would be a long-term equilibrium. So, yep. Now, a problem similar to what you saw in your practice set and in your quiz set. So, with a coffee truck, all we know is the numbers in black. So we know the quantity produced, and we have the total costs. And then we also know that the price is, let's say, $1.99 or $2 or $2.50, like one of them, right? So $1.99 in this case. To answer this question, you have to compute the marginal cost, right? So Monique is suggesting that 40 is a good, and Brian's suggesting 40. Why? Why are you suggesting 40? Huh? Can you speak up in voice, and why 40 is better than any other?
The next selection of 50, your marginal cost starts to increase.
It starts to increase, but marginal. Let's go
But still below 199. So
okay,
it should be able to
marginal
okay, right?
cost starts. Look, it's marginal cost. This is from the other. It's a typical marginal cost shape. It starts to increase somewhere. You're always operating at an increased part of the marginal cost. In fact, you should probably just disregard the reduction in marginal cost part. See, that's where it goes down and then starts to check mark up.
So 50 should be
right.
better.
Yes. It's closer to the marginal. It's closer to MR equals MC, profit maximization.
Yeah. So like imagine you had like marginal revenue as a line, as like a whole column here, and that would be 199 in every line. So how much should you produce?
I would choose 50, but I could be wrong.
No, he's right.
You're right, Genius Squad. It's all 50. Yes. So, so why? Because you don't want to produce 60. Because look at the marginal cost of 60 per cup, right? It's $2.50, right? And your marginal revenue is $1.99. But when you produce 50, it costs you $1.70 each. All right, so, and that's right below, that's the closest you can get. If so, it so happens that your coffee comes in batches of, 10, because of the way the coffee maker is connected, right, to your water supply or whatever. So yes, it's 50 would be the correct answer here. And you could even say, well, total cost. If you were to compute the average total cost, you can even make a statement about what the profit might be at that point. So what would be the average total cost? 85 to divide by 15. So, okay, the Monique is asking, you said the closest amount before you operating at a loss. I don't think about operating at a loss. It refers, here you just, you don't, I guess, yes, you just don't want to produce too much. Yes, I guess if you start producing too much, here the problem is finding the point, like how much is enough. So where should you stop producing? And the golden rule gives you that answer. Like you stop, you don't go where you're not producing at a loss really, because your profit, you're still making a profit, but your profit is smaller at that point. So you start to reduce your profit. Okay, so let's see, 85 divided by 5, okay, so that we could compute profit at 15. So, oh, you could compute total revenue. Why don't you do that instead? So total revenue at 50 is, you have what, almost $2 per cup, and you're making 50 cups.
It's $14.50, and you produce.
You already computed the entire profit. $14.50.
Yes.
Yeah, but let's explain how we did it. So you could find total revenue.
The revenue is 50 multiplied by 199. Minus,
Yeah, 50 multiplied by 199. So that's about what, $50? Oh no. Oh, it's about $100, right? So just under 100.
Yeah, that's about. It's not just about, but that's the exact number. Is $99.50.
Okay, $99.50, correct. You know, in case you haven't been yet stricken by the fact that economics is not a precise science in many ways, like they're plus or minus a few cents is just fine. Although sometimes, yeah, $99.50. It's Arizeda is telling us, okay, $99.50, and then you subtract 85, and yes, you get $14.50 or so. So yes, you can find the profit easily as well. What else is a typical problem? Something like a word problem like this. In the long run, equilibrium in a perfectly competitive industry with identical firms. It results in all firms earning zero profit, economic profit, producing the quantity associated with their break-even price, producing the profit, maximizing quantity at which marginal revenue equals marginal cost, or all of the above.
All of the above.
Ta-da! Pretty much all what 90% of the time it says all of the above, right? It's all of the above. Yeah. So you are doing really well with
really, I make mistakes too.
well, yeah, I noticed with several people, they tend to want to produce more and not to stop producing. Oh, this reached its maximum, right? So the profit reached its maximum. I'll get back to that slide in a second. It's different, right? The total revenue, total cost. You can have a small difference, you can have a large difference, and then the difference starts to decrease. And so, yeah, you don't want to produce too much when it starts to decline. If you're in the market, look, a business in real life can have different goals, not necessarily to maximize profit. What if your goal is to get market share, to like beat everybody in their game and to capture market share and even maybe to sell at a slightly lower price to undercut your competitors, right? It's a possibility too. But here we assume that we're maximizing profits. Okay?
But I think the words thing is kind of confusing. It tends to be, well, probably just me. I tend to dwell with the wordings and then
Okay.
compromise my brain to make a right justifications.
Have a, yes, have a little piece of paper next to you and jot down a graph. So it's always a way to solve a word problem like this. So, and Monique is saying, yes, Monique is agreeing with you that it's confusing, basically. Yeah, so I always like I put together, okay, I draw the equilibrium, and here's how you know that the cost is too high, or how do you know that you should be producing less when the marginal cost is higher than the marginal revenue. You're producing too much, like Monique is trying to produce too much all the time. Who is that?
Someone has questioned Professor Fernand.
I've stopped sharing the slides, so we're not looking at any question in particular now.
Someone raise their hands.
Okay. Just keep asking them. Start asking in voice. Monique had a question, right? Or somebody else? No questions? Well, then we're doing good. I take it as a sign that you are now officially experts in perfect competition. And next time you'll be experts in monopolies. So we'll see you next week then. Any issues, shoot me an email. Okay?
I did send you email,
I
Professor.
will respond, as I mentioned at the beginning. I'll respond soon. I was just a little swamped without it.
Thank you so much for all the information and your feedback.
Oh,
I really
yeah.
appreciate it.
Okay. I'm glad that it's helping. That's the goal. All right. I'll see you next week then, people.
Thank you. Bye bye. Have a good night, everyone.
Mm-hmm.